So this is Vedanta Series question and answers. You have no questions, you have no answers. So we'll begin as usual with prayer for teacher and student. Since you by now know it familiarly, you can repeat it with me. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astu Ma Vidvishamai. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work with great vigor together. May our studies be illumined. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. As usual, I will shut off my microphone so you can formulate a suitable question.
Well, if no one has a question, I actually have one.
Very good.
It's more like an observation kind of question.
Okay.
I was reading Raja Yoga, and when it comes into the part of Pranayama chapter, when I read Vivekananda, he says it has to do very little with breath. And the more I read it, the more I feel, for me, it's more freedom. It's like the attainment of how you control everything within you so that nothing kind of is controlling you, which is the final thing what you want to obtain, which is liberation. But then when you look for pranayama somewhere else, it's just so sold at his breathing. So then I said, okay, let me have a look at the 8 limbs of yoga. And I had a look, and it again defined it down to just breath, and which obviously, it plays such a big part because it's part of the senses and so on. It's like I'm trying to kind of conceive a clear definition of each understand, because I think I do understand. But for me, I would put before Vivekananda's definition, because Vivekananda is Vivekananda. He was something else. But for me, it's more energy. Is the energy that goes within you. Is the energy that is united you with everything that you can obtain if you work with it. So yeah, that was the question.
The problem with the sutra literature, whether it's Brahma Sutras or whether it is the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, is that they are sutras, they are threads. In modern surgery, we have the phrase suture, a thread. You take the sutures out, it's derived from the same root. So what do we mean by a thread? It's a convenient way of learning. If I tell you some principle, let us talk about organization and time, and I say time is money, let us say TIME, time is money, exactly, TIME. And then we discuss what we mean by that. We mean that, you see, wastage of time is equivalent to wasting resources, and we have to consider budgeting time exactly as we budget money and all of those kinds of things. And we spend maybe 3/4 of an hour, or more accurately 45 minutes in time language, in time currency, discussing this issue. And then I ask you, please, can you repeat everything we said? You can't really do it verbatim, but your memory has retained more or less everything that we said, provided we issue you with a trigger. That trigger is a thread, an aphorism. Time is money, exactly. Then you say, oh yes, and we discussed this, and the whole thing floods back to you. It's a very convenient way of capturing for a student some principles. And so the bare minimum thread is given with the idea that once we read this, and it may be one word, it may be a few words, it may be a line. If you read the words and the lines separately, without the context, you'll be entirely confused. You won't have any idea what it means. For that reason, All of the sutra literature requires comprehensive commentaries. And so in terms of Patanjali Yoga Sutras, we have Vyasa's commentary, and we have Vachaspati's Glass, which is a commentary on his commentary. So it goes on. So when we discuss this step of the 8 limbs called Pranayama, then we have to understand what is actually said. Nothing is said. So we have to resort to the commentators. What does it mean? And we come to one conclusion. It's exactly what it says it is. It is control of energy. And sometimes it's useful to take away these terms that have come into New Age language. Yoga, what is pranayama? When I first started studying how to yoga, exercise, and so on, there was one person in a class in Zimbabwe who, and this is the 1960s now, who said, okay, let us breathe in some prana, as if prana is something floating in the air. See? But pranayama is control of energy. So what is energy? We understand more of what energy produces today than ever before. And in Swami Vivekananda's time, there was no such term as energy. The term was force. It was Newton who provided this term, force. And so this whole concept of energy really has developed, and we still do not know what it is. So the first answer to a question, what is prana, is I don't know. But I know it's energy. And what is energy? Undefinable. However, I know everything in this universe is energy, because we take Einstein very seriously in 1905 when he says the famous E equals m squared, or E equals mc squared. E equals m is the real equation. Energy is equivalent to matter. So what is all the matter of the universe that we see, tables and chairs and people and teenagers and chewing gum, teenagers chewing gum, etc.? What is it all? The sun and the moon and all of this, we can, wherever we look, we have to have some kind of generalized principle. And we know that what we call matter is not what we thought matter was some 100 years ago. The whole thing about matter has been dissolved, because fundamentally at the very bottom is quantum mechanics, is the quantum world. Indeterministic, we don't know what's going on. Things can arrive in different places exactly the same time, just like a wave can be present everywhere, simultaneously going everywhere. And so we're talking about the world of possibility, we're talking about the world about probability. It's all probability. But to try and capture that and make something meaningful, we have something like Schrodinger's equation, where there's a wave function that is produced. So most of the theories will be along the lines of undeterministic, non-deterministic. And even one of the great understandings of how this whole thing works, what we might call a pilot wave theory, is deterministic to some extent. But then, in terms of how this behavior occurs, is non-local, that is indeterministic. So we can't get away from it. So we only know energy by its products. We know that there is potential energy. We know that there's kinetic energy. We know that when we swing a pendulum, gravity brings it down, there's potential, and kinetic energy brings it up, and then potential energy brings it down. So we know that the different types of energy are convertible. And then we have the whole world of thermodynamics, that after kinetic energy, we have radiation. And then we have electromagnetism. And lately, we have discovered maybe strong and weak nuclear forces, which may just be variations of electromagnetism. So the ancient sages were convinced there were 5 energetic forces. Now, supposing we control energy locally, that means in our own bodies, in our own minds. In our own minds, we call it psychic prana. And in our bodies, we simply call it prana. And then we understand how we can view this human individual, not as a single person, but as various coverings to a real, solid, perpetual, infinite entity. We'll find this in the Taittiriya Upanishad, where we understand this much better. Taittiriya Upanishad tells us that we're not just one entity. And one of the coverings will be called Prana Maya Kosha. That is that body that is made from energy. That is energy captured from the universe, localized, seemingly localized in an individual area, and put forward so the metabolism in the human body can occur. And thinking can occur, and any movement can occur. What is energy? The thing that makes something move. It doesn't tell us exactly what it is. So, how do we control this energy in ourselves? Where is this energy most evident? It is most evident through the electrical currents within the body. And these electrical currents, which are called nadis, these are kind of channels. You can't observe them scientifically, but we know the effects and we know how to change them, and we know they respond to electromagnetism, and we know they respond to polarity as a result. And one of my party tricks whenever I speak to a group of yoga people is to tell them, let me see if I can change the polarity of your nadis. They understand the term, they just don't know what it means. And so we can do that very easily. And we can experiment very easily. So the human body is something like a working, waking magnetic field. And we can probably measure the effects of the field. In other words, energy is not confined to a body. Energy is universal, it's everywhere. And Swami Vivekananda in his commentary says, if we control the energy, if we really control energy here, we will have controlled energy everywhere. We'll have controlled the energy that appears as a sun, as appears as a moon, appears as a galaxy. We have controlled the entire existence of energy. E equals mc squared. Forget about the c squared. It's just to reconcile units. Energy is interchangeable. That is not interchangeable. It is equivalent to mass. What looks like something mass is really energy. And when this energy changes its frequency, when it changes its wavelength, when it changes characteristics or features like this, then it looks like something solid. Now, how to reconcile the solid world of gravity and things with the subtle world, which is indeterministic, is the biggest question in modern science today. But we have the answer. The ancient sages have the answer. The answer lies in the term, it's an appearance. It looks like something and it's not. And what makes it look like it is because we only have 5 photographs of our existence, the 5 senses. It restricts our view of things. And therefore, it has a relative reality because it's only related to the organs, the instruments of registration, the instruments of information. And today's world is an information world, information technology. In front of us here, we have 3 people. At least 2 of them I know are involved in information technology. So there's a tendency today to look at things from an information transfer or absorption point of view. It's just an interpretation, that's all. How we interpret the world in front of us depends on our attachment to these different layers within us. If we attach ourselves to the physical, the world will look like the physical world. It will look like the body, it will look like matter, it will look like solidity. If we attach ourselves to the mental world, the world of experience, the world of registration, the world of the unconscious mind, the world of the bulk of all our reactions, the registration of all this, then it will look like an idealistic world with idealism ruling. And if we look at the world from a point of view that of a subtle variety of understanding it, we'll experience joy, we'll experience sorrow, we'll experience variations in the way we view life and so on. And of course, if we are experiencing anything, it means we're not that thing. If I'm experienced as a sunset, I can't say I'm the sunset. If I experience a nice ride with the car, I can't say I'm the car. If I experience clothing, either warm or otherwise, I can't say I'm the clothing. So there's this objective and subjective view of things, which becomes obvious when we look at it. The problem is we don't look at it, and when we don't look at it, it's called attachment. It's a misunderstanding. And then we have to deal with that. So Taittiriya Upanishad suggests ways of how we deal with that. Now let's go back to your question on prana and pranayama, control of prana. How do we control the energy? The easiest and most direct way is to control your thought, control psychic prana. Because we know this mind over matter, not I don't mind and you don't matter, not that kind of thing, but mind over matter means every thought will have its corresponding effect in every material cell of the body. If it's joyful, the body will be joyful. If it's depressed, the body will be depressed. I'll have liver disease or something like that. If I have fear, the kidneys will fail. So we have to take this body as a psychophysical entity where thought acts swiftly on the body. And if we are able to sustain a joyful thought, then the whole body will vibrate with joy. In other words, all the koshas, all the bodies will vibrate with that single thought that arises in what we call this intellect. What we can call it is this Vidyamaya kosha. Or in yogic language, we call it bhukti. So joy and sorrow, these are properties, so they're not properties of any object. It's inherent in the person who looks at the object. It's the reaction to the object we have in front of it. And for that reason, we have the capacity to control it. And little joys are surpassed in the greater joys experienced when we realize the power that is the prana through yoga, the practice of spiritual discipline, discernment, detachment, self-control, and meditation. Then we are replacing all the negatives with the positives and affecting everything there. So supposing you don't feel energetic one day, and then you feel energetic the next day, then you have to look in the region of this prana maya kosha. Now supposing you get a shock, or supposing you have some kind of mental disturbance somewhere, some trauma, some kind of stress, you'll notice it first in how the lungs are moving. And this can be used to your advantage, because if you get a shock, if you're stressed, then the first thing you do is you regulate the breathing, because the breathing and the breath and the action and the motion of the lungs has a direct correlation with the nervous system, with the nerves. And for this reason, we eliminate any disturbance to meditation. These 8 limbs, Ashtanga Yoga, are all limbs that, or steps, if you will, that will lead us to a singleness of idea called meditation. And then, so how do we cultivate them? By removing all the obstacles. Same concept is there in the Taittiriya Upanishad. If we have these 5 koshas, pancha kosha, if we have them, then we can take one disturbance away or a detachment. We can detach from one level or one coating, if you like, one covering, and then the next one and the next one. We can do it systematically. But you see, the quick, easy way of doing it is to dive deep down and catch that principle that never changes, that looks through these koshas to be joy and sorrow. We can go to there directly, and then all the others will be corrected. But if we want to do it the other way around, we have to say, okay, not everybody feels that. So supposing I feel my individuality, then let me see. If I sit down to try to make an intimate connection with this eternal self called Atman, then what will I do? Well, first of all, I'll make sure that the body is doing well. I'll make sure that the mind is not disturbed. I'll make sure that when I sit, I don't think, oh, green fields, how wonderful, how beautiful nature is. Oh, did I put the green jersey in the wash? Or green is the national color of Ireland. How green it is. I should invite my relative across to Ireland and we'll take a trip to Galway. And so you're now on a different mental trail. So how to control the mind? Well, we have to control the morality of it. In other words, what we have to do is we have to understand the mental field and every other field, physical field. The mind is only a subtle version of matter. That there are three components to it, three observed components to it. And two of them have a characteristic of self-interest. These we know are binding elements, and for that reason, these are called gunas. One day the mind is dull and lazy or feels this way. What do? Then we shift our gear to something that is more enthusiastic and we become active. And when we see that is not really satisfactory, there's a swing between joy and sorrow, then I can take that gear and shift it even further and put it in the area of what we call sattva. And why should it give a higher reaction, or why should it give a greater joy, more joyful, joy-bearing effect on me? It's because the source of our misery is an attachment to a self-image called I. And it's equivalent to saying, I am either one or all of these koshas. So what will I do? I'll cultivate a higher way of thinking, and everybody should cultivate it. 5 principles are there. Now, there are variations of that in different civilizations. The Judeo-Christian variety will be 10 commandments. We can distill those commandments into something moral, because every system, every level of civilized human behavior as we understand it, in its true context, not in its, racialistic context or ethnic context or colonial context, we take it absolutely in its true sense, that is, to be a better citizen. Then we can take these moral precepts that apply to everybody, and we can also extend some of them as well, but we can distill them into some different characteristics. If we read the Bhagavad Gita, there are many, many more. But if we're talking of Patanjali Yoga Sutras, then we can talk of 5 critical things applicable for everybody. That is, we should not have any measure of criticism or injury in thought, in word, in deed. And it's easy to catch. If we have a mind to do it, most people let it come and go and don't even notice and think it's a normal thing to react in such a way that it is self-damaging and damaging to others also. And it is a negative term, it's called ahimsa, but the positive variety of it is love, unconditional love. We have unconditional love, selflessly entertained, selflessly cultivated. Then the thought of injuring somebody or any other being, by the way, not just a person, will not even enter our minds. And then what will happen? The ecology will be good. We won't have any crisis in the earth. We won't have any environmental issues. We won't have global warming. We won't have none of these things. We'll be able to treat nature as nature treats us. And so that's applicable to everybody. And it's not easy to cultivate. So if we haven't even got past the starting post, then how will we even try to discuss this pranayama? Because pranayama comes down on the list. This yam, and there's the nyam, there's the asana that is dealing with taking the body out as a disturbance. And then there's pranayama, taking the nerves out as a disturbance. And at the same time, cultivating energy. What kind of energy? Psychic energy. That's what we were aiming for. So there's no doubt that when we come to that, we can regulate any disturbance from the nervous system that will be deleterious to our level of concentration or concentration. If you concentrate on something, you want to remove as many of the disturbances as possible. You remove all the disturbances of the mind, that is behavioral disturbances. You then make it more refined through deliberate, cultivated observances that strengthen the will, including purification of the body, purification of the mind. This is where yoga exercise can come in. This is where naturopathy can come in. This is where cleaning, looking after your health. This is where all the purification factors that have recently come out and which should be a normality through dealing with COVID. We should always wash our hands and so on. These are simple things. Everybody should be doing it. And purifying the mind, that is remembering. And we can take a kind of saying from the Bhagavad Gita, 15th chapter, remembering that a small portion, a portion of myself, says the Lord, has gathered together the senses along with the mind and become the living embodiment of a you and a me and so on. Forgetfulness of this is called ignorance. So, all right, how do we remove these obstacles of morality and ethics? We make sure that our mind is pure. We make sure that our body is pure. We make sure that our nervous system is pure, not just by breathing, but a thought will do it. And if the thought is not there, then we resort to plan B, to do some simple breathing, and it is dangerous. It is dangerous if you have not conquered chastity, which comes up in the first set of rules, if you will, in yama, brahmacharya. If your energy is being wasted in lust and greed, then, and a very clear statement of this is from what Swami Brahmananda tells us, then you'll upset the whole nervous system, because the nervous system comprises this electromagnetic field. And if it is upset through these immoral behaviors, then you will create some very, very severe mental problems and physical problems also. Do I have some examples of this? Yes. In Zimbabwe, there was a man who said, I can't meditate. When I sit and meditate, I get severe migraine. And I said, who taught you meditation? And he told me. And I said, and so tell me all about your lifestyle. He says, well, I'm finding it very difficult. I take drugs and drink, and my behavior, my lifestyle is like this, some gambling and some immoral behavior and immoral thoughts and so on, to do with sexual activity and so on. Okay, all right. That's why. See, because you skipped everything and went to pranayama. You were in a hurry to do that. See, because part of his meditation practice was to do all this breathing here and there. So Swami Vivekananda, in his comprehensive commentary on pranayama, that is, comprehensive commentary on the system of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras encapsulated under the system of Raja Yoga, is extremely clear about it. He gives some simple exercises if you require it. And so one of them would be systematic, regular breathing with no retention. The problem is in the retention. Rachaka is the problem. So if you're simply doing it simply like counting to 10, doing abdominal breathing that can be done anytime, anywhere. So he gives 3 or 4 simple exercises that anybody can do safely. For the rest, he says, take a teacher. So there is much misunderstanding about this subject of pranayama. But I'm going to tie this in with the question that came to me in text. If I can find it somewhere. Here it is. Okay. So the question goes like this. It says, I have another question. Okay. In most spiritual traditions, they speak about joy within. For any happiness, one needs an object and a relationship with them. For example, tea and my taste buds enjoying it. Good example in my case. In spirituality, the entity is our own higher self. So where does this joy come from? Is the happiness only about the calm state of mind? It's a good question. And I quoted from the Taittiriya Upanishad, so it's a good place to start in answering this question. So you see, for any happiness, he says, one needs an object. I would dispute this. So, because that's the very antithesis of what our modified self-controlled behavior should be like. Because happiness is one side of a coin, unhappiness is the other. And if we're looking for happiness in an object, then all objects will disintegrate, and all connection with those objects will be disappointing. And my favorite example is like this. If you ask a child, what is heaven? Try to describe it. They may say, particularly in the summer, 1 ton of ice cream. All right. But if you present 1 ton of ice cream, after a few mouthfuls, that's enough heaven for me. Thank you. But then 2 days later, they say, is there any of that 1 ton of ice cream left? So you see, that's a child, but are adults any different? Not at all. And that's the problem. And that is why the first step in spirituality is actually viveka, discernment. We have to make sure that the movement, the spontaneous movement and desire for happiness is found in the right places. We can't deny that we all want unending happiness above everything else, power, wisdom, property. We want unending happiness. And as I always say, I never met anybody who sat down and said, my goal is to be unhappy. So we assume this is a primary characteristic goal of all humanity. Not just all humanity, though, because it's a key movement in survival of every species. Why would we want to survive? We look in a direction that will give us pleasure and happiness and so on, and we look away from it, from those things which will give us sorrow and fear. So we don't want to be fearful. Fear, of course, is the primary source of unhappiness. When you look at it properly, you see it's the mother of all unhappiness. But it's this continuous strategy moving toward pleasure and away from the opposite of it, away from pain. This constant shift, this constant movement paddles us along. It's like being in a canoe. When you paddle the one side, the boat will go to the opposite side. You correct it by paddling on the other side. In this way, you're propelling yourself forward, but you're doing it in a zigzag, or like sailing. Sailing, there's no such thing as opening up your sails and traveling in a straight line. You have to tack. It's called tacking. You have to make sure you go this way and then that way, and that way becomes a correction. So it seems to me that happiness is not found in an objective, and yet there must be a reason why we look for it beyond survival. And the reason is because our nature is joy, our nature is blissful. That reflects in every other kosha of our being, so that once we go through kosha 1, which is food, made from food, this body is made from yesterday's bananas and milk. So that's just this body. It's a vehicle, and it has no life of its own. The key question that has been there from the beginning of humanity and is a key question today and still not answered. What is life? The great physicist Schrödinger delved into this question, Erwin Schrödinger. Here in Ireland, in Dublin, he gave a series of lectures like that, What is Life? It comes out as a book, and he explores many different avenues. But it's a key question, and people are still debating it today. What is life? Another question is, why should it be there? So, all right, what is life? Most people will avoid the question and say, well, I'm living, and so I make the best of it as best as I can. But if that means that I have the zigzag course, it's not taking me anywhere. Unlike the boat, it won't take me to the shore of endless bliss. So let us assume that our nature is like this. And we're not just assuming it, we're picking up the wisdom of the Taittiriya Upanishad, but also our observation. We look as if we are some totality, and yet we can look at these different fields that we call coverings or koshas or sheaths. We can look at them independently. And for each independent kosha, there's an independent observer. And so these koshas are described simply in terms of their subtlety. So we have an example for that. Let us look at this. So we can view, for example, the analogy of a light within us beaming. And when you put a covering on it, the luminosity becomes less, radiation becomes less, or the radiance, I should say, becomes less. You put another covering, a little denser. Denser is our language for ignorance. Then the light becomes even denser, and so it goes on until the most dense is simply reflected in the warmth of the body and the shining evidence of life in the eyes and the movement that takes place, not only externally, but also internally in terms of digestion, blood circulation, the hidden world of cell replacement and nourishment. The whole lifestyle of a cell is a replication of the totality. There's a birth, there's a life, there's a death, there's a replication, there's a breathing, everything that we find in the totality of the human body, we will find there in every single cell of the body. And so this is the evidence of life, but we know it not intrinsically within the body. Something is operating from behind it. And so we have to go to another level that, when inserted and associated with it, makes this material thing made from food move. And so this is called the next level, which is the Prana Maya Kosha. That is, it's made from pure energy. But doesn't food give us energy? Yes, but it requires energy to generate the energy, to make the conversion. That's the difference. And so we then have to look for that, and we have to look for it in a universal way, because the generalized principle must necessarily be everywhere. This is the axiom that maybe is ignored in modern times, that if we have a small sample, we want to know what the whole universe is and is like. We don't have to travel to the end of the observable universe. We'll never reach there anyway. There's so many billions of light years away. So we have to take this as a sample and say, what happens here on we might say a microcosm, will happen everywhere. Then let us say that this universe, not multiverse, this universe is one body. And just as we have these different layers, we can resolve all of this into energy, because these koshas are causal in nature. The pranamaya kosha will cause the movement of the body, and will cause the metabolism of the body, and will cause the heat of the body, and will cause the radiation of the body, the regulation of the body in such a beautifully harmonious way that it doesn't matter if we're living in the South or the North Pole or in the equatorial regions, the body temperature remains the same. We have a mechanism like that. Some intelligent thing is there inside it. And we can call this life. So this Pranamaya kosha is there, and more subtle than that, and yet more immense and more truthful, more generalized, would be what we call Manomaya kosha, that is the mind. What is that? That is everything else other than the intellect, the reasoning faculty, the deciding faculty, the executive officer, the one that truly experiences joy and sorrow, and on account of that makes some executive decisions rightly or wrongly. And the decisions are based on how the other koshas are viewed in reality and how itself is viewed in reality. But none of these koshas have any independent existence. That we have to understand straight away. They're all insentient. Something is giving life to the preceding one. And what is that? We have to find it in its causal aspect. And the cause, therefore, of all this other activity seems to be the next layer. And I say seems to be because don't forget, all these layers are completely insentient. That means ultimately something is lighting it from within. And when we discover that, we actually discover bliss. But the final kosha is also called an Anandamaya kosha. And we have to avoid the mistake of thinking that's the finality. It's not. What is the obvious example of it, the deepest example of that? Deep sleep. We all come out of deep sleep and you say, were you happy? I was happy. I was peaceful. I was blissful. Why? Because there was no duality in it. There was no second person to argue with, or no second person to sue me, or criticize me, or even praise me, where my reaction is also erratic because when I don't get the praise, I feel miserable. And things are fine as long as all of these sailboats are going well. All of these preceding levels and layers are all good. But as soon as I get a difficulty, then I'm no longer happy. And my pursuit then seems to be in vain, my pursuit being happiness. We can substitute it. Instead of saying joy, instead of saying happiness, instead of asking, why do I have a sense of humor? We have to look at our most fundamental nature, and that we can describe as bliss. The Taittiriya Upanishad tries to explain to us, through human examples, what this level of bliss might look like. So let us have a look at it. So let us talk about this Anandamaya kosha, or sheath of bliss. It's finer, of course, than the other sheath that seems to be full of luminosity, that is called the intelligence. And the sheath of intelligence is the subtle sheath subtler than that is the sheath of bliss. This bliss must not be confused with the supreme bliss of Brahman. It is just an echo of it, just a kind of thin covering. And the real blissful is our own nature and is not a sheath. It's not an object. It's an eternal subject. It's a witness. It's an eternal witness. It's a knower. It's a thinker. It is that entity that sits behind everything and shines and lends its luminosity and life to every other sheath. Each one being an instrument, as it were, something that is not in our way, something that was useful to us, something that we should not get rid of, but something that will act as a linga, that is an indication, a sign. There's more, there's more, there's more. Ramakrishna's example of going into the forest. A woodcutter, he goes and cuts some wood in the forest and sells it in the market, and an internal voice says, oh, go further, go more, go more. And he goes deeper into the forest. And in depth, in the deeper areas of the forest, he finds sandalwood, and it becomes much more productive. And still the urge, go deeper, go deeper. So if we really want this happiness, more than happiness, mere happiness is nothing. If we want absolute bliss, then we have to dive into this ocean of bliss that is our own nature, without any fear, without clinging and being attached to all these other koshas and their objects. And these koshas themselves, of course, must be objects. So you see, a modification of nescience is all of these layers that are there, including this bliss, and it is a modification of nature. Sanskrit, we call it prakriti, as opposed to Sanskriti, thing that is perfect and refined. Prakriti is something that is rough and unrefined, asymmetric, and yet looking symmetric, no doubt. It manifests itself by catching a reflection of the ever blissful Atman. And the chief features of the sheath are pleasure and rest. And pleasure that is experienced when one comes in contact with an agreeable object, it comes out like that. It comes out as the pleasure we feel as normal kind of joy, be it physical, be it mental. It comes out like this. It has to. If our nature is bliss, we have to find signatures in every single dimension of our life. And so the person of good character feels all this bliss in a small measure and without the least effort at the time of the fruit of his virtuous deeds. I did something good. I feel good about it. Where is it coming from? It's coming from this blissful nature. The fullest manifestation of this is in deep sleep, and I hope that you're not experiencing it as I speak. Because there you maintain the complete unconscious effect of being devoid of any suffering. There's no suffering of any kind in it. And of course, we can use anesthesia to induce such a thing as well. General anesthesia. But after waking from deep sleep, a person can remark he has slept happily and peacefully, which means that he is not associated with that indirectly. It's a partial manifestation, and it's also known in the waking state when the senses come in contact with pleasant objects. And here we have to understand these three states of consciousness have to come into it. In these three states of consciousness, the one state of consciousness, there only bliss remains, or bliss dominates, I should probably say, would be this sheath of bliss. And when we bring in the others, we get dream. Ultimately, we get the waking state. But in each one, we should experience this echo, this reflection of bliss. The sheath of bliss, though it's very close to the Atman, you can say even in the theological scheme of things, it is God. It is that area of potentiality, creative potentiality from where everything else comes. And so the sheath of bliss, though close to it, cannot be the Atman itself, because it's the product of ignorance, because it's just a blank. So the fact of this can be known from the experience of unconsciousness in dreamless sleep. But further, this sheath, like the other sheaths, is endowed with changing attributes because it doesn't last. You surely will wake up. But the Atman is omnipresent, it's everywhere, throughout all states. It's omnipresent, and also it's self-existent. Because you see, the dreamless sleep is not self-existence, it's a contingent thing. So the five sheaths are all modifications really of one single thing that we call Prakriti or nature. The potentiality for manifesting, first as energy and as matter, and the interaction between the two produces all the other things, including ultimately the physical body. So none of these five sheaths possess absolute reality. Whatever reality they are perceived to possess is due to the Atman being the substratum of all the other things. Let us have a look at this Taittiriya Upanishad to understand it. We can start off with a statement here. Yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasa saha. It starts off like that. Anandam brahmano vidvan Na viveti kadachanati. Tasyesha eva shariratma ya purvasya. The person who knows this bliss, and we're going to change the term now, of Brahman, because what our Vedanta says is Brahman and Atman are one and the same thing. If there are 7 billion people on the planet, you cannot say there are 7 billion infinities. It doesn't make any sense. Only one thing is there. Atman and Brahman is one, is a fundamental dictum of Vedanta. So he who knows this bliss of Brahman, that is in the universal context, which in you, which the mind is unable to grasp, and before whom all speech fails. You can't describe it. It's indescribable. You can describe other aspects of joy. Even then, we find some difficulty. You can't have 3 buckets of joy. You can't, it's not a tangible thing like this. He never fears. Why should he never fear? Because what is the opposite of unending bliss? It is fear. Because 2 things are there. This body, is indeed the soul of the former body consisting of prana. So says this Upanishad. Now there's another text after that. Other than this body consisting of mind, there's another body that consists of intellect. This body lies inside and fills up the former body consisting of mind. As it were, we have to add. This too takes the human shape. Its human form is similar to the human form of the former, that is the body consisting of mind. It creates a cohesive unit, which we call I. Faith is its head, and righteousness is its right limb, and truth is its left limb. It's describing something that corresponds to the physical body. We understand it. At its core is the cosmic mind. That is, without the core, there's nothing else. Now you see our own experience of these sheaths is being elevated to the cosmos. It is the cosmic mind. That's its support and its tail, and its equivalent, therefore, to the intellect. Now, if you take the 3 states of consciousness, 4 states, if you will, if you count the witness, Turiya, the 4th, then this blissful state corresponds to deep sleep. And this cosmic mind corresponds to dream. And therefore, the ruler of dream, according to the Mandukya Upanishad, will be Hiranyagarbha, or cosmic mind, or the womb of creation. And then when we come to waking state, the ruler is Vishwa. The intellect accomplishes successful performance of activities, noble activities such as the sacrifice. It accomplishes all actions and all the illuminating factors, unfortunately mistranslated as gods, devas. Of course, the proper term is deva, but mistranslated in English as gods. So this is supreme. If one realizes intellect as Brahman and does not swerve from this, he leaves all sins of the body behind and attains all his desires. This body is the soul of the former. So each kosha is identified with Brahman, not separated. Initially, we can have the concept. How do we reach this understanding? By seeing the insensity of each level, of each kosha, or each sheath. But where does it all come from? There's only one existence. And if you take this body as supreme, that is the supreme principle, Brahman, you are called a materialist. If you take this as the mind, you are called an idealist. But if you take the whole thing as one entity, and that ultimately beyond or within, if you will, this body made from bliss, then you are a Vedanta. Then it goes on. Other than this body consisting of intelligence, there is another body consisting of bliss. This lies inside and fills up the previous body consisting of intelligence. And this too takes the human shape. Its human form is similar to the human form of the former, and so goes on. Joy. Joy is its head, just to give you some idea. Delight is its right limb. Great joy is its left limb. But bliss is its core. Brahman is the support at its tail end. There is the following shloka again about it, so it comes on to this. Asaneva sa bhavati, asat brahmeti vedachit, asti brahmeti chidvira, santam inam tato vituriti, tasyesha eva sharira atma, ya purvasya atatona uprushnaha, uda vidvanam mamam lokam pritya. Kashana gacchati aho vidvanam logam pritya kashitsam ashmata. If you believe, the person who believes Brahman as non-existing himself becomes non-existent. Whatever you think you are, you will be this. And who believes Brahman as existent, he is known as existent too. Whatever you meditate on comes to you. This body is the soul of the former, and the body consists of intellect. Then arise the following questions connected with this. Does the one who knows or who doesn't know Brahman ever reach that world on departing life, that world that is the supreme? Or does he who knows Brahman ever reach that world after departing life? Which one? And then the answer comes, does he, Brahman, so desired, we have to say, as it were, making us understand something in a human way, may I grow manifold, and therefore he performs austerities and so on. This is how things began. It starts off as existence. But then what about bliss? In the beginning, indeed. This is a unique story of creation. In the beginning, indeed, all this was non-existent. The Genesis Bible begins, in the beginning was, you see, or the light was there, let there be light. That was the beginning. In other words, this first consciousness coming, but this is first bliss coming. Indeed, all this was non-existent. And then indeed did existence take birth, and it came into existence on its own. And that is why it is known as perfectly created. And if we said this to a modern scientist, they'd immediately understand, oh, it's a singularity manifesting as a Big Bang, a cosmological position I don't personally agree with, but the idea is the same. And then indeed did existence, it came into existence. And that which is perfectly created is the essence of bliss itself. So in the beginning was bliss. And bliss came into existence. And from there, everything became blissful. Whoever tastes this essence becomes perfectly blissful. What indeed would have lived and what would have drawn breath if the sky of bliss had not existed? It is this indeed which bestows bliss. Bliss comes from this. Can you get anything more positive than this? No sin is mentioned, no defect is mentioned, no unhappiness is mentioned, no depression is mentioned, no void is mentioned to fill through effort. And if one finds a home or resting place in that self, Atman, which is invisible, indescribable, self-supported, and fearless, he attains fearlessness. But one ever feels even the slightest apartness from this by identifying, we may add, by any one of the koshas, then fear arises in that person, and we can easily test it out. Because one of the greatest industries today will be people going to other people with various kinds of syndromes, various kinds of phobias of all kinds of things. And they each have a name: arachnophobia, fear of spiders. Or mostly we have a fear of our own shadow. You can work that out for yourself. Therefore, for the good but undiscriminating man, there is fear. There's the following shloka, of course, about it, which says, and which gives us a measure of bliss, but we can skip that. From fear it comes, because there's a whole analysis of bliss. And we have to go back and see. So it says that if there exists a young man, a pious and good youth, a good student, full of hope, determination, and strength, and he has wealth enough to fill the entire earth, reflect on that. Most people will say, yes, please. Let that one be one measure or one unit, if you will, of human happiness. Now that gives us a base, and we can measure everything against that bliss or that happiness. But 100 times that bliss of humans is one unit of the bliss of human elevated angels, if you will. And as is the bliss of one who is well versed in the Vedas and has vanquished all desires, and so goes on and on and on, giving us units, the whole thing can be studied well. Because it then magnifies that by 100 to the next level of beings and the next level of beings, and so it goes on. And each one is equivalent to that one who is well versed in truth, we can say, and has vanquished all desires. In other words, who knows the principle and has taken away all the desires. Now, there was recently in a talk I gave, and then we'll finish it off, that it was based on an idea, it was questions related to the subject of detachment. How can we be detached and yet live a normal life with family and friends and all the rest of it, misunderstanding what is meant? And it's as simple as this. Forget about the word detachment. When all desires have gone, then this is equivalent to detachment. And this is not just my saying this. This you'll find coming all the way full circle back into Patanjali Yoga Sutras that gives us a definition of what detachment is. So, okay, I hope I answered both these questions, both on pranayama and both on the topic of happiness. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you.
Garmagat Swami.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Oh.